want to go back to Susan Lee. There was a question put to her about women and whether quotas for women is the right way to go for the Liberal Party. The reporter there saying some within the Liberals have said it's a moronic idea, or called those suggesting quotas being morons. It just shows you really how tough her job is at the moment. It displays that this party that they cannot, that they don't seem to agree on on anything, and a direction forward from a branch level to policy at a federal level. What's going on?
Well, it is kind of natural. In many political parties, there are going to be differences of how you achieve a particular objective. The key, though, is does everyone agree that we have to increase representation of women in the Liberal Party? That's the first thing. And hopefully everyone does agree to that. So then it becomes a matter of what will be the version of it. So Susan's right. She's focused on the outcome and a little bit more agnostic on the way it'll get done. But she has a job to do to first get everyone to agree that it has to be done. It's actually the clearest thing she can do on this issue, and let other people start working out how it'll get done. You point out that there's divisions on it. Well, look, let's be honest. There are small groups on either side who have very loud, strong views, but the vast majority in the middle are thinking, well, how do we get this done? How do we modernise the party? So I think as long as we can first establish that everyone agrees something has to be done, we go from there. Susan has demonstrated at the moment a capacity to try and balance those two views. And I think she's going to be given some credit and some time to facilitate a solution on this.
I think so too. And you'd expect the party to have this period where not everyone's on the same train. There are different views about which way you take forward, and you can see that in how the opposition's responding to the news of the day. I wonder how you view what the opposition is doing in terms of the tariffs, the changing mind of Donald Trump, this lack of a meeting with Donald Trump and Anthony Albanese. I mean, my view is, Yaron, it is a little parochial. I think the opposition risk just looking like serial complainers on something that probably wouldn't be any different if there was a coalition Prime Minister in power. And I think that some within the coalition are just, this is a fire drill in terms of opposition politics, right? Absolutely. You'd expect them to keep the pressure on Anthony Albanese. But I don't know, it just seems a little parochial to me, and the risk of talking down Australia and looking a little bit petty.
I like your analogy of a fire drill, though, because at some point there will be a fire. And the reason why I say that is because we have been here before. When the Morrison government, I guess you could say, muscled up back to China on a range of issues, the Australian people were with the government. They supported those initial acts of defiance. We weren't going to be told what to do by the Chinese government. Then the Chinese government retaliated, a series of tariff increases. And then we started to see the consequence of those tariff increases. And then the voters started to say, whoa, maybe you've been a bit too tough on the Chinese government. Could you ease off? So the voters were with the government until they weren't. And I do think that whilst, it is early, there will be a point where voters are thinking, OK, but what are you really doing to fix the problem? There's a lot of sympathy for Anthony Albanese, and I think that's your point, because he's up against Trump for all of those complications. But after a while, people move from sympathy to want solutions. And so the notion of a fire drill is, well, really, at some point, they will be asking the same questions that the opposition's asking. The opposition's just well ahead of perhaps where voters are at this point in time.
Yeah, I agree with you in that. And looking at Anthony Albanese, I mean, he made this speech as well. He's talked about Australia's independence, our strength as a middle power, and still some within the coalition thought that was going to be a devastating read, and the White House will see that in a terrible light. I mean, I think we can, in Australia, we can get to this point where we seem to want to bend to the US, not upset Donald Trump, where I think a lot of Australian voters go, hang on, no, we need to stick up for ourselves as well.
We do, and Australians like that. But there will be a point where the consequences of not sticking up for ourselves or what Trump does, but the actual consequences across industries with tariffs, that will impact on sectors, and those business leaders, the employees in those businesses will start to say, but how are we going to sort this out? So there's a difference between the rhetorical positioning and the reality of where we might be in 6 months' time or a year's time, which is just how it was last time when we dealt with the Chinese government. So I think you're right. No one's got the balance quite right yet because this is a moving feast. This stuff is moving so quickly. And as I said before, people do have sympathy for the government because it's trying to deal with Donald Trump. The opposition's challenge is to, as you put it, not make it look like they're running down the country. And I don't think they're quite doing that yet, but they do have to be careful that they understand that balance as well.
Yeah, there is a risk, absolutely, at the moment that does happen. We're kind of in this weird period between the election and Parliament sitting. A lot of people are taking leave. New ministers, new shadow ministers are finding their feet, getting their head around their portfolio. Of course, there's this existential crisis, I would describe it, within the Liberal Party at the moment, the direction they go, how they get female voters, younger voters back. Realistically, Yaron, how much time should the coalition take to actually get their ducks in a row, let's say, get it together, formulate? It's my view that they do need to take their time a bit. I think there can still be an effective opposition as issues arise, but they need to take their time.
I think that is the point. They have that, I'll call it a luxury for the moment.
Yeah.
They just need to take their cue. They need to take their cue from Susan Lee. She has moderated the responses from the opposition. It's steady, it's calm, it's reasonable for the most part. That's how they have to be. Not because voters are saying, well, I don't like Anthony Albanese on that, so let me quickly look at what the alternative government's saying or doing. They're not acting in that way. The opposition has been given a job, and that's not government. So they've got the time to not consider themselves to be an alternative, but to just be, as you put it, a reasonable force of balance. When the government has done the wrong thing, to call it out. When they've done the right thing, to compliment them. That new version of combat's really important. People want to see modulation in how you deal with the big issues of the day. They don't want to hear everything at volume 11. And I think Susan understands that.
That's so right, because
they should take their cue from that.
Oppositions have a tendency to go to 11 on everything. Not everything requires the shouting to be turned up to 11. It's about this moderating of opposition, of trying to shepherd the government. And I think the first big test really for the coalition is going to be how they deal, not with the productivity summit per se, but this debate that we're starting to have on tax reform. I mean, the coalition needs to deal themselves into relevance here and stop ruling things out and trying to wedge the government too early. Would you agree with that?
I do, and I see no signs that they wouldn't do that. I think that there's a reasonableness
There's kind of like a ruling out of the GST early. Perhaps that was a bit of a mistake, but let's hope they can keep that. I mean, this is a coalition policy. This was Howard's signature tax reform. This coalition government should be able to own it as theirs, like Labor tried to do with super.
Well, you said it well. You said that they need to be relevant to the debate. I say a step before that is, are you relevant to voters? And there's an opportunity to be very relevant on tax reform for voters. Put them at the centre of your positioning and you'll get to the right place. And that's their challenge, to get the steps in the right order.
Yeah, I think so too. Yaron, always good to talk to you. We're in furious agreement today. Love it. We'll see you soon.